Hello, welcome to Spread Book Joy. Today I want to talk to you about my evolution as a reader, and then I'm going to tag some people to do the same thing. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack, and if you're not new, welcome back to Spread Book Joy. I love reading. Clearly, I've got a Booktube channel, but I was thinking quite a bit recently because there've been a few thousand subscriber Q&As I've watched that have got me thinking about people's reading journeys. I have a master's in education, and my research is all around reading and identity and people's evolution as readers. So I love listening to people's stories about how they became a reader. And recently I was listening to Scott on his 1,000 subscriber Q&A, and Scott, wonderful channel, go and check it out, Gunpowder Fiction and Plots, if you're not already checking it out. It's so good. And his evolution as a reader really interests me because he came to reading quite late in life. So it got me thinking about mine, and also a little chat I was having about with Gemma from Gemma Books. She did a book haul recently, and one of the books was Murakami's Wind Up Bird Chronicle, and I read that 25 years ago, and I said, oh, I really enjoyed that. And she's like, oh, you're in the minority because most people are like, oh no, they're not the Murakami. And I said, well, yeah, I really enjoyed it, but it's so long ago, I don't remember the details, I just remember I enjoyed it. But I don't know if I'd enjoy it now. So that kind of got me thinking about this whole, reflecting on my own journey and evolution as a reader, in the format of books that I read, in the way that I read, in the things that I'm reading. And yeah, it just kind of fascinated me. So I thought I'll just chat about it a bit on here, and then I'm going to tag some people to do the same. So kind of three aspects to this that I want to talk about, and that's kind of my evolution as a reader in terms of my taste in reading, what I'm reading, the amount that I read, and how I read it, so format of what I read, and whether Booktube has changed me as a reader, which it has, and not always for the better. So there are some fantastic elements to what Booktube has done for me as a reader, but there are also some negatives, I suppose, or just some drawbacks to it, which we'll talk about. So first of all, my evolution as a reader. So I don't remember learning how to read. I've always, as far back as I can remember, I could read. I didn't have a difficult journey coming to reading, and I was a bookworm from an extremely young age. I come from a household where my parents both were very working class people from Belfast, and they're from a generation that reading was what they did for fun because they had libraries and stuff like that, but they didn't, like, my dad's family didn't have a radio or anything like that. They were very, very poor, but they could go to the public library and they could read books in school and stuff like that. So they loved reading, always loved reading, and that was what they did. So it was never a question of whether we would read or not. It was just like this given thing. So we all read, my brothers and I all read, my parents both read loads. So I'm really thankful for that. And I've always kind of loved fantasy and magic elements in my reading. But then I got into my late teens and I worked as a bookseller for Waterstones, and I became quite a voracious reader of anything they had in the staff room as a proof copy. I bought loads of books because I got like a big discount on books. So I bought loads of books, and I probably read, back then, don't forget, we had no social media. You couldn't just stream loads of stuff. It wasn't like that. So I did just loads of reading. I had a book with me everywhere. So people stare at their smartphones now. It wasn't that time. This is the time when, you know, your phone was for phoning people, and only recently just for texting. So yeah, I kind of read probably at least 5 books a week at that time. I was like a really voracious reader, and I would read things even if I didn't necessarily enjoy them because I wanted to read them. And I read really quickly and it didn't bother me, and it wasn't like I feel like now that I have to really be selective with my reading because my reading time's so precious. But yeah, I didn't DNF, and I would read books. I would never ever read contemporary things like romance. I didn't read crime fiction or anything like that, or thrillers. I would read, any sort of genre fiction I would read would be sci-fi, fantasy and historical. But other than that, it was kind of very literary fiction I was reading because, of course, I worked in a bookshop, and, you know, you would read the Booker winners, you would read the nominated books, and you were exposed to quite a lot of this lovely literary fiction, and I read loads of it. And I think back now, and that I didn't necessarily love everything I was reading then, but yeah, I would just read. And then I became a teacher, and time became a factor, and yeah, I started just because I had very little time to read, I would make sure I was reading mainly fantasy and historical fiction. Then I started, like, because I think I had my brain power, like, for reading and doing anything, like, I didn't read any classics, didn't do anything like that. I started reading contemporary fiction. I'd read contemporary, like, not necessarily romance, but people like Mike Gale or Lisa Jewell. At the time, she was doing romance books, not thrillers like she does now, that kind of thing. I really enjoyed that, really easy, light reading. And I think it was because of the pressures of, you know, the job. Like, teaching's hard. So I really liked to start getting into crime and thrillers. Not so much thrillers so much as crime books. I really loved police procedurals. I was a big fan of the Peter Robinson DCI Banks series, and I've read pretty much all of those, probably apart from anything that's been very recently released. But yeah, and Patricia Cornwell and people like that. So yeah, I kind of completely flipped my taste, and I got back into children's books as well, because it's like a professional duty. And yes, that's what I was doing. And then the format of my reading, because I was reading less and less as well, I started to really slow down. I was lucky if I read a book every couple of weeks. Maybe if it was a really long book, it'd take me a month to read it. So I wasn't reading a huge amount, and it wasn't about the amount then, but I always had some form of book on the go. And I do a lot of rereading, a lot of comfort reading of Discworld books and things like that. But then there was a new George R.R. Martin book coming out, Dance with Dragons, and there was Wolf Hall, and there was one other really big chunker that I wanted to read. And I bit the bullet and bought a Kindle. And at that time, we were saving for a house. So I decided that, do you know what? I'm not going to fill up the house with more books. And I'm just going to buy books on the Kindle because it's cheaper. And yeah, we were saving for a house. So at that time, I stopped buying clothes and I stopped buying anything frivolous unless it was like necessary clothes, like a new coat or something. But I stopped buying, just spending money in general where I save where I could so we could buy a house. Did that for about 3 years, trying to save our deposit. And in that time, I just read on my Kindle. And then one day, I'm reading on my Kindle and I'm suddenly like, the psychological effect of not knowing how far along I was in the book, apart from a percentage, just really started getting to me. And I was like, you know what, I actually miss going into bookshops and book shopping. And by this point, we'd moved into our home and I decided I was going to treat myself. And that sparked me off again in this journey of books. And also, when you just read on your Kindle, all I was doing was reading what Amazon's algorithm was pushing at me, right? Unless it was an author that I was seeking out for myself or I'd seen a review of or whatever, but I didn't have time for that. So I was just reading what's been pushed at me. So then I decided, like, you know, what's amazing, going to a bookshop and wandering around and seeing all these things that you would never think to just search for on Amazon, and Amazon's not going to... It's just awful that my reading was dictated in that way. The other thing that I did at that time was I learned to crochet, and about 2013 I wanted something to listen to because I couldn't watch TV and crochet, so I had to look at it. So I decided to start audiobooks. And I did, and that upped the amount that I was reading because I was just not reading as much then as I had previously. No, and I've never got back up to the sort of levels I was in my 20s. But the audiobooks really changed the game for me and meant that I could read wherever I was. So yeah, audiobooks were a huge thing. Audible changed my life in terms of my reading. And then I was kind of, like I said, reading just like lots of fantasy and urban fantasy and historical fiction, and just picking up things that would delight me, basically, would just entertain me, not necessarily anything that would tax me. So come to Booktube, and how have I changed? Well, that has been the biggest and most amazing thing, I think, which is I am reading out of my comfort zone quite a bit. Wouldn't have been out of my younger me's comfort zone, if that makes sense. Like when I was a bookseller, the type of books that I'm reading now are the sort of books that I read when I was younger, you know, prize-winning books, classics, the quality of the books that I'm reading in comparison to the sort of wilderness years where I just read purely as an escape, that's changed, and Booktube has challenged me to get back to reading that kind of thing, books that make me think, books that make me learn and, you know, grow and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a positive side of Booktube and the things that I'm reading now. I'm also remembering a lot more about what I read. That's another positive about Booktube. That's how Booktube has changed me. I get to remember and think more deeply because I'm discussing my books regularly, which I never really did before, apart from with a couple of friends and maybe my brothers. I never really discussed books at length. So now, because of that, I think it's helping me retain what I've read more, and I can always go back and look at what I was thinking about a book by watching one of my videos or reading a blog post that I've written. So those are the positives there. And yeah, I'm reading a lot less average work. Books I read, they're either fantastic or as in, you know, they're really, really good. I rarely read books that I would classify as 5-star amazing books, because I'm very stingy when it comes to that. But I would say that the majority of the books I read are very good, high quality, engaging, enjoyable books. So I'm reading a lot more books that I enjoy, put it that way. I also DNF a lot. I didn't DNF when I was younger. I was a real stickler for finishing a book, but I used to read, had a lot more time to read. I'd read a lot faster, and it didn't really matter. Like I said, if you're reading 4 or 5 books a week, you can read a meh book and finish it off. But yeah, now I'm like very choosy. If I'm not enjoying a book, I've got so many books waiting for me that I just DNF. The other thing that's changed me about Booktube is I read with people now. I've never done that before. Lots of people were always shocked when I say I've never been part of a book club. I never wanted assigned reading. And if you've not got a Booktube channel, or if you've not done a buddy read or anything like that on any of the Booktube events that run, or any of the group reads that come on, you don't have to be a Booktuber to join them. You can just be someone who wants to join. If you're a viewer and you want to join, you can. They're amazing, because in a book club, I didn't like the idea of people picking my reading for me and having assigned reading. And still to this day, when I'm sent a book for review, for instance, unless it's a book I've requested, I've recognised that about myself. If I'm given a book and I've got a deadline for it, I invariably don't want to read it. So book clubs have never worked for me. But Booktube, it's like the world's biggest book club. It's amazing, because if I want to read a specific book and someone's reading it, I'll read it with them. If I want to read a book and I throw it out there as a group read or a buddy read, people will read it with me. And then you're reading books, not like a book club where someone random picks the book for you. You can just join in, like the FOMO book club we've set up. They're all books that Alice and Gemma and I want to read. If you want to join in the FOMO book club, feel free, but drop in whenever you like if it's a book you really want to join in on. And that's one of the things I love about it. I'm talking to and reading with people from all around the world, from all different kinds of backgrounds, and getting their insight, because we all bring something different to what we read. That's like one of the joys of reading, one of the pleasures of reading, is our interpretation of it and what we bring to it, which is why I teach reading comprehension as a teacher, and it's really irritating to me, because everyone interprets books differently based on their life history, their background, their reading history, what they can compare it to in their sort of mental library of books that they've read. So yeah, when you're buddy reading, you're reading with a person who's bringing an entirely different, not just life experience, but reading experience, and it can just be so enriching. So yeah, I love that. Downsides of Booktube, buddy reading. You just get this FOMO and you want to read with everybody, and people are amazing. And the downside of that is you become a joiner-inner, and you read too many things with too many people, you overcommit, and then before you know it, you've got so many pages of this book and this book and this book to read a day. And if you're like me and you have very little reading time in the day, that can be hard, really hard. So that can be a downside of it, but that's like overcommitting, right? That's a downside, but it's overcommitting. It means not having time to read just for you, to just read a book and be in your own little world with that book without discussing it with anybody. That is something that in the last few months I've barely had time for. So there's a little bit of a downside. Another downside is you kind of feel, and it's only me putting this pressure on myself, pressure to read for Booktube. Like, you feel this pressure to read for Booktube, which is ridiculous, because who's putting that pressure on? Me. I'm putting it on myself. No one's putting it on me. So every now and again I have to take a step back and remind myself that I'm doing Booktube for fun. If I'm reading, I've got stuff to talk about, and I don't have to be reading specific things, and I don't have to read, no one's expecting me to, no one's going to have a go at me if I haven't read this book or that book. So yeah, you have to kind of remind yourself of that. And the last thing is, since I started Booktube, I haven't had time for any other hobbies. And like I said, I started listening to audiobooks so that I could do crochet and things and have something to listen to. So I really want to get back to doing other hobbies. But much like I tell people when they say, how do you have time to read? I have to make time, right? I have to make time for these other hobbies, because I say that to people when they say they don't have time to read and how do I read so much? I'm like, I make time to read. So really, the downsides to Booktube aren't any that Booktube's put on me. It's the ones that I'm putting on myself. Just had a revelation. That's my evolution as a reader. I don't know if it's of interest to anyone. Probably won't get many views this video, but it's fascinating to me to think about and reflect upon how I've evolved as a reader and the type of reading that I do now in comparison to when I was younger, and the type of reading I do now that I'm on Booktube. So if you're a Booktuber, I'm going to tag some people and you'll be tagged below, so you can check that out down below and you'll be getting a mention in your notifications. How have you evolved as a reader in terms of what you read, the amount you read, and how you read it? Because I'd love to hear. All right, I'll speak to you again soon. Bye.